Hey everyone, in this video we'll be making the sun glare effect using Blender. So here's a screenshot from an anime that we'll be using as a reference. We will be focusing on making this sun part here as well as this glare effect here. And we'll be doing that mainly using the compositor. Alright, to start off we're going to have to set up our scene. So let's add in a camera. And then we're going to reset the rotation and rotate on the x-axis by 90 degrees. And then let's move it back on the y-axis by minus 30 meters. And then let's move up on the z-axis by around 3 meters. Okay, so this is where we have our scene. The next thing we gotta do is add in our light source. This is going to be the light source object where the light is going to be coming out from. We're going to be adding a UV sphere, and let's scale this down to 0.1. And then we're going to move this in the top left hand corner, just like we have in our reference image. Now let's add a material to this sphere. Let's make a new material, change it to emission, and then we'll make the color white, but we're going to increase the strength to around 30. Alright, so the next thing we can do is set up our background color. Let's go to the shading tab. Let's go to render view. And in order to set up the shading for our background, we're going to have to go to the object type and click world. So this is going to be a color of our background. So we want to put in a gradient. A blue gradient from white to the blue. So let's, in order to do that, we're going to add in a gradient texture, color ramp, mapping node, and then a texture coordinate. We're going to be using the generated coordinates and using the mapping node to a vector. And then we look at our gradient texture, it's set to linear, so we just have a vertical line here. We want it to be horizontal, so we'll go from bottom to up. So let's change the rotation on the y-axis by minus 90 degrees. And then we can use our color ramp to add in our color. So this black part is the top, so let's make this one blue. And then let's add in two more to make it a little darker blue and a lighter blue. And white at the bottom. Alright, so right now our white part is probably on the bottom. It's like around here. But we want it to be here, so we can move our texture up to right around here, 0.2. Alright, then we want to have stylized colors. Right now it's set to film mix, so let's go to render properties, go to color management, and check to transform to standard. Okay, so we can plug this in our background and the background to our output. Now we have our world background. Now what we want to do is we want to separate this background and the object. So we want this to be separate layers. So we want this to be the sphere object to be its own layer without the background. So in order to do that, we have to go to film and click off this transparent checkbox. So we have, when we view the sphere only, it's just going to be transparent background. So that sets up our scene. Let's go to the compositing tab and we can start our compositing. First off, we got to check off use nodes to enable the compositing. And now we have our nodes. And we don't see anything right now, and that's because we didn't render our scene yet. So we have to first render it in order to see it. So I'll go to render image. All right, so here's our scene rendered. Right now, it's just our sphere with transparent background. So now in order to add in our background layer, we're going to need to have enabled the environment socket on our render layer. So in order to do that, we have to go to view layer and click off environment. And this will add an environment socket to our render layer. Now let's combine these two together. And so we can do that by using a mix color node, setting it to add, and have this environment here and our sphere here. And then we have to re-render this And there we have it. We have our layer with just their background and then layer with our sphere. You could change this up to 1. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is make a light street. So let's get our reference image here so we can see what we're doing. All right, so basically it's this streaks, these light streaks here. So we're gonna split this up into different layers. So we're gonna have this. We're gonna start off with these 4 right here. So let's add in a layer node. Let's insert that here. Now we can see that we have our streaks here. You can set the streaks. Right now it's set to 4 streaks. If you increase this, you get more streaks. But we want the 4 right now, and we want it on a little bit of an angle. So we can change the angle here. Right around just a little bit. And then we want also very long streaks. So these are like they stretch out to here. What we could do is set to the quality to low, and then we have longer streaks. And then what we can do is add in a math node set to multiply, and we can make it brighter or darker. And we can set this to 2, and then we want to thin out, have it more thinner streaks. So in order to do that, we can add in a dilate erode node, change the size to -4, we'll get thinner streaks. And we can tweak these values, you know, to however you wish. But this is what we have so far. Now next, let's add in our next layer, which is going to be these small ones here. So let's copy this glare node. And let's see what this looks like. We have the same thing here. But this time we want a little bit more streaks. So let's have around 8 streaks. And let's move it more. Okay, then we could do the same thing here by duplicating these 2 nodes. We don't want this one to be that bright, so let's have it only up to 1.5. And then we can add these 2 together, and let's see what that looks like by using another mix color, setting it to add. Let's add these 2 together and see what this looks like. Okay, so we have overlapped that much, so let's turn the angle a little bit more. Yeah, right around here is okay. But then we can turn down the fade so it's not the same size, because right, these are shorter than these ones. Okay. And then the last one is that we can make this really long one here. So we can do the same process and copy these, add this one in, see what this one, so we only want 2. And we want it to be on this angles here, so like this. Let's add these 2 together just so we can know which ones overlaps or not. Okay, let's make this one a little bit brighter so we know which one it is. Okay, so it's not this one, so we want it to be around here. All right, so we don't want the fade to be that much, so we will increase it. Make this a little bit thinner, because this one is really thin. Okay, so the next thing we can do is that this seems to be the longest it can get. So in order to make it go past here, like this one is like twice as long as this one, we can scale it. So in order to do that, there's a transform node here. And what this will do is scale this image. So if you make it like around 1.5, it'll be 1.5 bigger. But due to this, it'll move because it's scaling the whole entire image, including this area here. So we have to move it back in place. So we just have to tweak these X and Y values and move it back in place. Okay. So right now this is considerably longer than this one. Okay, so then we can add this to our original background and we can see what this looks like. So this is it for our streaks. So the next thing we're going to do is make the bloom effect, this bloom effect here. So let's move this down So we're going to add in another glare node. And if you switch it from streaks to bloom, connect the image and see what this looks like. We can see our light sources emitting light. What we can do is we just want it to be a little bit brighter. So let's make this a little bit bigger. So we can use a color ramp and set this to B-spline. And then let's make this a little brighter. So let's put in a multiply node here. 2 is good. And then in order to make this more softer, because right now it's really sharp, you can put in a blur node. And then you increase these two values, it'll blur the entire image. Let's set it to around 150. And then we can add this to our streaks. I have an add node here. Let's see what this looks like. So we have our streaks with this bloom effect. Right now it's only, the bloom is here. The bloom only goes up to here. So right now the middle part is bright, but we also want bloom up to here. But it gets considerably less bright. So what I'm going to do is just add another layer in. So I'm just going to duplicate this. And we're just going to see this one. We don't need the color ramp. We would want to make it bigger, so more bright, around 3, but increase the blur. Increase it way up. Alright, so now we just have to add this to our other bloom. Let's copy this. And let's add this here. And that's what we have. Now we can add this to our background and let's see what this looks like. But that's the bloom effect. Alright, so now that we finished making our bloom, next thing to do is to make our ghosts, which is these circles right here. So in order to do that, we can add in a glare node and connect this. And then if we look at this and set it to ghosts, you can see that these are our ghosts that Render will make. So right now, this is too small. This is because of our object here. Our object is originally small. But the other thing we have to notice is that these are not exactly circles. It's not a sphere, this is a hexagon. In order to get this shape, we're going to need another shape. So in order to do that, we're going to need another layer. Let's go back to our layout. And we're going to add in another icosphere. And let's change this to 1 subdivision. So this will be our shape for hexagonals. And then now we have to separate these 2 layers. So this have 1 layer for the sphere, 1 layer for the icosphere. So we're going to do that. Up here we have a view layer section. You can click to add a new layer. Let's add the copy settings. Now we have 2 layers. And then for each layer, what gets rendered is by collection. If you add a new collection, let's separate these, the sphere and icosphere. The collection 1 and 2. So whichever is enabled is going to be the one that's rendered. So collection 1, we want to enable it. Collection 2, we'll disable this one. And on the second layer, collection 1 will disable it. And then collection 2 will keep it enabled. That way we can only see this. So let's move this to around the same position as our sphere, right around here. And let's add the same material as our sphere. Now if we go back to our compositing tab, we can duplicate our render layer, and then from here we can now select the second layer. And we can use this. First, nothing is showing because we have to render it first, so let's render it. Okay. Now we have our hexagon shape here, and now we have our ghosts here, which are also taking the shape of our object. Right now we just want the ghost, not the object itself. So if we go to the glare socket instead, this will only give us the glare. Now we're gonna work with this. So let's lower down the strength a bit because this is not that bright. And let's change this to high. That way it's not that blurry. And then let's increase the iterations. So the more iterations, the more ghost it's going to be. And then is to make it a little bigger. Let's use our transform node again. And let's just increase the scale to 1.5. All right, that seems good. And we're going to have multiple layers. So this is going to be our small ones here. Now there's also these bigger ones and then these even bigger ones. So let's duplicate this, connect this one here. And for this one, go to the glare socket, lower down the strength even more. So by this time, we're going to only want this bottom half. We don't want this top half. So duplicate this transform node. Let's make this ×2 to make them bigger, but then we're going to move it so we only see this bottom half. This is where our light source is going to be, so we want this to be like in that area. So right around here. So we add these two together using our mix color. Set to add. So now we have the smaller ones plus these bigger ones. And then we have a third layer, which are going to be the ones that are even bigger. Let's just duplicate this. Have smaller iterations, but we're going to increase the size, maybe around 2.2. So we just want these really big ones. And let's move it. We only see the bottom half. And let's add this with the other ones. And let's see what this looks like. The strength is a little bit too high, so let's lower this one. Okay, so now that we created this effect, we can add this to our original effect. So let's add this here. Let's duplicate this and add it. And let's take a look at our... All right, so now the strength is kind of too low, so let's increase it. Yep, that's a little bit better. So next thing you want to do is you want to make this a little bit bigger because this line encompasses like around half the screen almost. So let's add in a transform node to make it bigger. Oops, we don't want the ghost to be bigger. Let's add it after before this. Make it ×2. Then we'll put it back to the same spot that it was, right around here. Yeah, so now that it kind of compensates half the screen now. Now it became more pixelated, so in order to fix that, we're gonna have to blur it out a little bit more. Let's add in a Kurohara and then a blur node. Let's increase the size of this to around 13. And we get this kind of effect, and we can increase the uniformity. Not that much, maybe around 100. Increase the sharpness. We don't want those sharp edges. Then we can increase electricity. And now we want to blur it. Let's blur this. Maybe on 20 is good. And also we can also add in a highlight erode node after this to make it more thinner lines. All right, so we could do a notice here that this one is not centered, right? So let's move this one down around here. That's more like it. So the last thing that we can do is that, so if you notice here that there's like a rainbow effect right here, it's really light, but there is a rainbow here that's kind of round like this. Let's make that effect. In order to do that, let's add in a eclipse mask. So this is going to be a mask. If we look at this, it's just an eclipse circle. We want to increase this to be as wide as our screen. And then we also want to move it because it's only like this part right here. So it's just like this part right here. Okay, so now we can blur it. Let's blur it. We increase the blur. The eclipse will have softer edges. About 150 is good enough. And then now we can add in our colors. Let's go to color ramp. We can get a rainbow color easily by changing this to just L and changing this to clockwise. So we want to make both the ends black. And then we add in 2 more here. So one, we want one to be red. So click the RGB tab. And then the other one to be blue. So this will now get every color in between red and blue. Now we have a rainbow color. And then we want it to blur because you don't want it to be this concentrated. So let's blur it. Let's copy this one and blur it again. Okay, so we just want this left side, I mean this right side. So let's move this a little bit right here. Yeah. All right, so this may be too much blur. No, I think it's okay. Now we can add this to our, let's put another add node on top. All right, then we can add this to our environment. Okay, so now we have this rainbow effect here, which looks pretty good. All right, and that's really the whole effect. You can tweak these values a little bit more to get a little better result, to make it more clear. So, you know, maybe you want this to be more brighter. You can tweak the add factor here. Get this to be brighter. Pick any of these values. You want any of these to be brighter. But that's basically the whole effect. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.